Welcome to the CHCI Tech Summit panel, A Healthy Digital Life. This session is possible due to the gracious contributions from our sponsors, Apple, Dropbox, and the Entertainment Software Association. Our moderator for today's session is Jens Manuel Krogstad, a senior writer and editor at Pew Research Center. He has authored or edited hundreds of studies on topics that include global migration, Latino public opinion, Hispanic demographic trends, and U.S. border enforcement. Please welcome Jens Manuel Krogstad.
Good afternoon. My name is Jens Manuel Krogstad, and I am looking forward to moderating today's panel on a healthy digital life. Before we start our session, I'd like to thank CHCI for creating an online space for dialogue and engagement on important issues impacting the Latino community. And before we dive into the introduction of the panel of experts, I wanted to lay the groundwork, offer some context about this issue based on some recent reports and research that we published at the Pew Research Center. COVID-19 has highlighted the central role the internet plays in the lives of Americans of all ages, educational levels, and racial and ethnic backgrounds. This spring, we found more than 3/4 of Americans said losing internet or cell phone service during the outbreak would be a big problem for their daily life. So really, digital life has become real life for Americans, for many Americans during the pandemic. And it's important to note that there are differences in how different Americans access the internet. Overall, more Americans have a smartphone than home broadband, and there are some differences by race and ethnicity. Black and Hispanic Americans, notably, are more likely to have a smartphone than home broadband. And this is also true for those with a high school education or less, and those with incomes of less than $30,000. About 6 in 10 parents with lower incomes say it's likely their children, when they're learning remotely at home, would face at least one digital obstacle to doing their work. Some of these obstacles include doing schoolwork on a cell phone, using public Wi-Fi, or not finishing their schoolwork due to a lack of a computer at home. But even before COVID-19, many school-aged children faced a quote-unquote digital homework gap. 1 in 4 Black and Hispanic households with school-aged children didn't have a high-speed internet connection. And parents have some concerns about their children and screen time. 71% said they're concerned that their child might spend too much time in front of screens. 61% of parents have sought advice from doctors or other medical professionals about screen time. So this is really a major area of concern for parents. And parents tell us that YouTube plays a central role in the digital life of children. 80% of parents of young children say their child watches videos on YouTube. And even amongst all these concerns, parents themselves struggle with screen time. 68% of parents say they at least sometimes feel distracted by their phone when spending time with their kids. And as a parent of a 2-year-old daughter, I certainly identify with that. I think we all struggle balancing our digital life and our home and family life, even more so now during the pandemic. And before we dive in, I want to make sure we note that we want to hear from you, our audience. So please place your comments and questions in the chat. You can also continue the conversation on social media at #CHCI Summit. And with all that said, let's introduce our panel of experts. Congresswoman Lori Trahan, who serves the 3rd District of Massachusetts in the U.S. House of Representatives. Noel Candelaria, Secretary-Treasurer of the National Education Association. Stephen Balcom, founder and CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute. Allison Vent, Global Head of People Strategy and Operations and Analytics at Dropbox. And Annie Chavez, Senior Director, Federal Government Affairs at the Entertainment Software Association. So welcome, panel, and thank you for joining us. Before we jump into specific questions, I'll ask each of you to briefly explain the interests you have in this issue. And if you could keep those responses to about a minute or two, that'll allow us to address some of the more specific questions we'll have. One last note, Representative Trahan will have to leave at about 1 p.m. Before the Q&A due to a prior commitment. So with that, let's start with Representative Trahan. Could you please tell us briefly about what brings you to this issue?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join all of you today. I especially want to thank Jens, my fellow panelists, and those at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute who worked tirelessly to put us together and have this annual event, especially right now during these unprecedented times. You know, as a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I am deeply appreciative of the role that CHCI plays in developing the next generation of Latinx leaders. You know, last winter, I had the pleasure of hosting a CHCI intern, Glendy Alvarez, in my Washington office. And she took such pride in her work for the program, and she offered unbelievable skills and unique life experiences, assets that added tremendous value to the culture of our office and the services that we offer. To answer your question, or to give you a sense of why I'm here today. Over the past year, the coronavirus pandemic has altered life as we know it. In an effort to keep students and families, educators safe, more than 50 million American students transitioned from classrooms to online learning, including my own. But millions of kids across the country are learning in totally new ways, in hybrid or fully remote settings. So although necessary for the health and safety of all, this transition has exacerbated inequities across our education system for many students, particularly those who have access to the equipment or the technology necessary to complete their studies. And as you already mentioned, early reports show that Black and Hispanic students are those who attend underserved schools disproportionately have showed declines in math and reading levels. And Congress has the opportunity to pass legislation making major investments in our nation's broadband access with the Moving Forward Act, the HEROES Act, to provide relief to our states and our local school districts to help address those inequities. So as a member of the House Education Labor Committee, I hold the unique position where I can actively voice my support for those measures, measures that will create a more equitable public education system for all of us. And I look forward to continuing that work and participating in this important panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Representative. For the first question, what would you say are the biggest challenges Latino children are facing in K through 12?
So as I mentioned, millions of kids across the country lack internet access at home. They're at great risk at falling behind in learning during this pandemic. You know, we've called it the homework gap, and it is affecting both Black and Hispanic students from underserved schools at disproportionate rates. Our public education system is already unequal in many ways, and the pandemic has only exacerbated these inequities. You know, it's been months since the House passed the HEROES Act, and that legislation builds on the advancement in the CARES Act from this spring. It includes much needed and long overdue relief for working families and state and local governments and school districts. It included $90 billion in funding specifically allocated to support statewide and local funding for elementary, secondary, public post-secondary schools to make them safe with upgrades to HVAC and ventilation systems, and to fund the budgets that are experiencing dramatic shortfalls so that we're not cutting at a time when we need to be adding. HEROES also set aside $1.5 billion in funding to close the homework gap by providing funding for Wi-Fi, hotspots, Chromebooks, tablets for all those households who need access. You know, in October, the House passed another version of HEROES Act. We now call it HEROES 2.0, that, you know, also included $12 billion in homework gap funding for those hotspots and those connected devices for our students. To say that we're frustrated that it's been sitting in the Senate without a vote is just an understatement. And, you know, we're working on a negotiation. But the reality is, when we talk about building our country back better, we're talking about making sure that we're not going back to some old form of normal, that we're actually making leaps and bounds in progress in erasing these inequities in our school districts. But we do that through the budgets and the appropriations that we pass in the Congress, and that is that is something I champion on the Committee on Education and Labor, because we're seeing it play out right now during these really difficult times.
Great, thank you. It's great to hear the steps Congress is taking to address some of these inequities. And one last question for you. What digital strategies should kids and parents think about adopting during this time?
Well, I'm not sure I'm a role model for what everybody should be doing. There's no question that right now my kids are in front of a screen more than ever. They're fully remote. They're not in school at all. And we have to be really intentional about the breaks that we take from technology, because it is the form of their learning. It's also the way that we can see their grandparents and their cousins and their friends, right? I mean, look, we're all playing Among Us, and that's not really the answer is, more screen time. So we have to be very intentional about going outside, about moving, about doing things together, board games, puzzles, you name it. But I do think that we have to show our kids how to be present for, an in-person conversation or an in-person activity, and really show that even though during this time we are often sitting in front of a computer, and, like me, I'm telling them to hush because, we're all being incredibly mindful that we've all made this migration. We also have to hold up the activities and the things that can sometimes fall by the wayside because we are so focused on our learning and our meeting up with our friends and family. So it's been a struggle, I think, for everyone. But I think the most important thing is that you inject the normal things that we've always done, but maybe have taken for granted into our daily routines.
Well, thank you very much for those insights. We can certainly relate to some of those challenges. And next up is Noel Candelaria. Welcome. And could you tell us a little bit about what brings you to this issue?
Sure. Thank you, Jens Manuel. I am Noel Candelaria. I'm a high school special education teacher from El Paso, Texas, and serving as the newly elected Secretary Treasurer of the National Education Association. We represent 3 million educators from all across the country, just about every community in this great nation. And for us, this issue of systemic inequities and systemic racism, we've known that it's existed long before this pandemic. And this pandemic for us is just kind of, unmasked the inequities that we knew already existed, but are now in every, living room, in every bedroom, in every home, across the country. When we are now bringing, what was traditionally, the brick and mortar school, where we provided, as much as we could for all of our students to diminish all of those inequities. And now this pandemic has exacerbated and now pushed those inequities directly into the homes of our students and our educators. And we have seen directly the lack of resources, not just, with technology, but just the lack of resources in general that our communities, especially our communities of color, indigenous communities, and Hispanic and Black communities, and how that's impacted them directly during this pandemic. And it's a struggle and issue that, as the National Education Association, working with our state and local affiliates, have been working on for years. To try to diminish and close these gaps that we have known long existed, that now are front and center in front of all of us, especially as we have moved a lot of our classrooms into a remote setting, where a lot of our students didn't even have the basics, pencil, paper, crayons, to complete some of these assignments, let alone the technology needed to adequately connect with their peers and their teachers and learning outside of the traditional environment.
There really are so many challenges facing students today, and I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the challenges students are facing right now regarding digital health and hygiene during this pandemic.
I mean, I think, when we think about, the inequities and, we think about how quickly a lot of our districts with very limited resources, back in March, right, when we transitioned to remote classrooms, and quickly realized how many students did not have the technology, did not have the access to connect and have adequate bandwidth, because you have families that have multiple students, all within one household trying to connect at the same time, and the issues of bandwidth. And, while a lot of our districts, did tremendous work in trying to, send, for example, mobile hotspots using buses to provide mobile hotspots in the communities, in apartment complexes, and wherever our students were, to try to bring that connection to them because of the lack of infrastructure. We also saw that, the students who were now having to, weather the elements. In the summer, late summer, it was the heat. Now we're getting ready to enter, the coldest part of the season. And so, trying to weather these elements, and, the when we think about inequities and the fact that it's still, too many of our students have to rely on those outside, sources, and are going to have to weather storms and don't have access to the internet, when it's most convenient to them, for their learning style. And so, we are not only looking at connectivity issues, access to technology, but we're also looking at, right now, what's happening with schools opening and closing and sending students back and forth, and the social emotional impact that this has had on our students, which is why, as the National Education Association, we've been very, very adamant about, making sure that we want to open our schools when it's safe. Right, and that requires having the resources, like Representative Trahan said. That Heroes 2.0 Act not only provides our districts with the $12 billion that we know is needed to build out infrastructure through the E-rate program that districts know that schools utilize, that is a safe program that can quickly scale up. But we're not only looking at the short term; we're looking at the long term needs of what our students are going to need post this pandemic. I mean, there are so many inequities that we have found right now. But having access to teachers. I mean, we are losing record numbers of teachers at this moment. Who not only have lost their lives, or educators, but are because there is no clear plan on reopening, or making sure that they have the proper personal protection equipment, everything that's needed to safely reopen a school, are choosing to opt out of the profession, right? So we are going to see not just short-term but long-term impacts, and long-term investment that we are going to have to invest in our public school system to make up for this 1 year, because research has shown that it takes 3 years just to close that 1 year of inequities for a student. So we are looking at not just the needs that our students need in hardware, software, making sure that we have the most experienced teachers in every community. We have students who, prior to this pandemic, didn't have access to a public library in their community. The only public library was their school, and that's been closed. And so we are looking at all of these inequities, and the investments that we have to do to invest in our public school system, in our infrastructure, in the people that work in our public schools moving forward.
And to address these challenges, could you speak to any solutions that could be considered, specifically when we're thinking about digital health and monitoring? Does the NEA have any policy recommendations?
Yeah, so when we right now, what we are really focused on, like Representative Trahan said, is the Heroes Act 2.0. I mean, the original Heroes Act was going to provide $175 billion to our public school system, right? Not just on funding for infrastructure, but on the people that are needed, to adequately make sure that all of our students have the resources. Right now, when we're looking about some of the solutions, if you go to our NEA.org website, we have tons of resources, not just for parents and educators, but for our students, on how to be able to adequately navigate the challenges of being able to meet the needs of all of our students. We have students in special education who currently don't have access to their public school, right? And that requires federal investment to make sure that we have the adequate number of teachers, that we have the buses, to be able to transport them to and from in the most safest, responsible way. for every single one of our students. And so, making sure that all of our communities have the resources that they need is critically important, especially in our Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities who have historically been underfunded. And so, when we're looking at how do we close this gap, right? How do we look at investing in the infrastructure that we know is there, and looking at making sure that every student has access to that quality educator that is going to connect with them, not just digitally, but when we're able to reopen safely, is going to be really important. And that's why we're calling on everyone to contact their senator, because resources are going to be critically important for our school districts to have what they need in order to not only reopen safely, but meet the needs of our students today and moving forward over the next several years.
Well, thank you so much for highlighting some of the challenges, the many challenges and disparities that so many of our students face. Next up is Stephen Balcom. And Mr. Balcom, could you explain a little bit about what brings you to this issue?
Well, thank you very much, Jens, and thank you also to CHCI for the kind invitation to be with you all today. So I am the founder and CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute. We're an international nonprofit whose mission is to make the online world safer for kids and their families. We operate in what we call the 3 Ps of policy, practices, and parenting. So we pay a lot of attention to the public policies that get generated by our friends on Capitol Hill. We track the FTC, FCC, the White House, etc. But we also keep an eye on what's going on in London and Brussels and Sydney, because this is a global environment in which we and our kids are operating in. We conduct our own research. In fact, we just published some research into parental attitudes and teens' attitudes towards parental controls and online safety tools at our annual conference a couple of weeks ago, which I'd love to talk about. Our second P is industry best practices. So we are a membership organization. We have companies from Apple to Yahoo in the alphabet, if you will, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and we work behind the scenes with them to up their trust and safety practices. And finally, we have a project called Good Digital Parenting. And the idea behind that is to empower parents to confidently navigate the web with their kids. Notice I use the word confidence. We don't use scary language. We don't try and create fear or whatever. We give them something called the 7 steps to good digital parenting, as well as online safety contracts and tips and tools and resources, and in English and in Spanish, to help them gear themselves up for the very difficult job of parenting in this digital age.
And are there any additional details you'd like to share about how parents can confidently navigate the web with their kids?
Well, first of all, take a very deep breath. You're not going to get it 100% right. It would be pretty good if you got it 51% of the time right. This we've already heard folks refer to screen time, and this is a big issue for kids, and it's a big issue for us adults as well. One thing I would like to do, though, is to suggest that this is a broader issue and that there's a difference between screen time and screen use. I mean, if your child is on their phone or on their laptop talking to their grandparents for a 3/4 of an hour call, that is a fantastic use of their screen. If all they're doing is mindlessly watching video after video, that is probably not such a great use of their screen time. So let's make sure we can separate those two out. The other thing I would say, and something we challenge parents when we talk to them at PTA meetings and community centers, is to be a good digital role model yourself. Show your kids how you can put your phone down at dinner time, how you can give them that one-to-one attention that they crave. The number one complaint we get from kids is that they can't get their parents' attention because they're always on their phone, or dad's always just checking his email. So let's make sure as Representative Trahan said, make sure they get the board games out, make sure you go outside, and give them that kind of attention that they so much want.
Thank you. Yeah, and you had earlier mentioned you recently released a report a couple of weeks ago looking at I think it was parental controls and online safety tools. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, it was interesting. We found some generational differences. We found that boomer parents were more concerned with external threats like predators, whereas millennials were far more concerned about behavioral issues like cyberbullying and sexting. And they were also concerned that their kids might be the ones who are acting out online. We also found a big generational difference in terms of who is responsible for keeping kids safe. Twice as many boomers than millennials said that parents were responsible. Millennials thought that industry, government, others also played a role in this overall environment. And I would agree. I think that industry really must step up to provide better tools, easier to find, easier to use. But one thing we also found out was that when we talk to teenagers about parental controls, they absolutely despise them. They hate them. They just think it's literally controlling their behavior. But if you talk to them about online safety tools, the privacy settings, the alerts that they get, the ways in which they can block people, they love those because it empowers them. It gives them agency. So I think it's just a different way to think about this. And particularly as our kids get older, we move them from the more restrictive parental controls into the teen years. We should sit down with them and say, okay, show me how you can keep that Facebook post private. Show me how you can report this bad behavior on TikTok. And we parents might learn a thing or two as well.
Yeah, those are some really interesting generational differences. And you've given us a lot to think about. And next up is Allison Vent. Could you tell us a little bit about, and Representative Trahan, if you need to leave, I know we're approaching the 1 p.m. hour. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And Allison Vent, could you tell us a little bit about what brings you to this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here and for having Dropbox here. So just to kind of, talk a bit about what brings us to this issue, it's important to just, I think, give a quick overview of what Dropbox does as a company. So we're really focused on cloud storage and collaboration, and it's all about helping our users keep their life organized and flowing. And our mission as a company is, to create a more enlightened way of work. And we're really focused on helping people be organized, stay focused, and really get in sync with their teams, with even families and things like that. I think what brings us or brings me to this issue is we actually recently announced Dropbox's long-term remote work strategy, which we're calling Virtual First. And it's really focused on giving employees more flexibility about where they get their individual work done. It means that remote work is actually going to be the primary experience of all employees at Dropbox. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean we're abandoning in-office work altogether. We're actually going to continue to facilitate in-person team gathering and collaboration in what we're calling Dropbox Studios. And prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic, as a company and many other companies were already considering what the future of work would look like, because there's just been an increasing desire from employees for more flexibility. But certainly the pandemic really accelerated the conversation around what the future of work would look like. Our aim with this Virtual First strategy is really to break away from the notion of a traditional workday. We have a few practices we're going to be putting into place next year, like core collaboration hours and utilizing nonlinear work days to allow our employees to really work around a schedule that works for them.
Thank you. That's fascinating. I know, especially for people who are lucky enough to be able to work remotely, it seems like there are some big changes coming up in the future of work. And what are some of the best business practices that you could talk about, like advanced software updates, password management, things that tools people can use to maintain a safe and secure online life.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different things that we're certainly considering with the move to virtual first. So privacy and security is something that is really top of mind for us as a company. And then certainly as we kind of move into primary sort of remote work moving forward for us as well. There are a number of different kinds of tools that we use in terms of kind of overall security, whether it's things like Okta, for example, or we use 1Password, for example, to keep everything really secure. Though moving forward, we're also going to be really focused on different kinds of collaborative kinds of software, whether it's virtual whiteboarding and things of that nature too. So so there's just a lot that we're really considering. But again, privacy and security is something that's really important for us, whether it's for folks that are working at home or that might be working in more collaborative spaces moving forward too. So it's definitely something that's really top of mind.
Okay. And just more broadly speaking, are there any other topics or themes you wanted to be sure to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just the overall kind of concept of digital health is something that's really important to us from an employee perspective. And, again, we saw this sort of trend towards remote work start well before the COVID-19 pandemic. And just as a whole, in terms of promoting digital health among our employees, there's a number of different things that we've instituted. So I know there's been a lot of folks on this panel that have talked about sort of the challenges that our parents face and children face, and that's something that we're really focused on at Dropbox. We have a number of parental benefits that we've put in place to support our employees in this, whether it's allowance for things like caregiver support or educational support, mental health support as well. Again, we talked about sort of this notion of collaboration hours, which is really around a specific set period of time on sort of each day to focus on core collaboration. And this does not mean that folks are in kind of back-to-back Zoom meetings, which again, we know is contributing to sort of this exhaustion, this digital exhaustion. But it does mean that, we're really focused on when does it make sense for employees to kind of synchronously collaborate. And so it's really about employees kind of becoming more intentional about when do you need to be available from a synchronous perspective, and then when can you actually do work asynchronously too, which is really, really important. This notion also leads, I talked a bit about this before, nonlinear work days, which is, again, kind of breaking away from a lot of these traditional norms as it relates to work, which typically folks have, kind of worked this 9 to 5 schedule. With core collaboration hours, we're giving more flexibility to employees to actually work in the evenings or early in the morning, kind of what works best for their schedule and their preferences. A couple of other things that we do to really promote kind of digital health and good digital hygiene too is we instituted a program called Unplugged, Personal Time Off, which is basically an opt-in program that allows you to really just disconnect from everything digital while you're on vacation. And then we've also done a number of kind of company-wide time off days. And in fact, over in Thanksgiving week, we did a gratitude week where the entire company took the week off, just again, promoting, I think, overall wellness and good work-life balance for our employees.
Well, thank you for offering a glimpse into some of the digital tools available and some changes that look like they're coming up for the future of work. And next up, Annie Chavez, thank you very much for being here. And could you tell us a little bit about what brings you to this issue?
Yeah, so on a personal level, my interest started in my first career, which is a middle and high school teacher. At the time, trying to figure out how do you engage, are there tools available to engage students and how to best use those tools. I later went to work in the U.S. Senate, focusing on tech and telecom policy there, and am now here at the Entertainment Software Association. ESA is the trade association for video game creators. So we represent companies from as small as one game to multinational corporations. in their work on the gaming side. So that's how we get to where we are now. As we know, gaming is becoming a larger part of our entertainment landscape as well as our education landscape. We see gaming expanding its reach, especially in the current situation where gaming is in many places the venue which now a lot of social interaction is taking place. I know for my 12-year-old nephew, he and his classmates have a Friday game time regularly scheduled that they never miss. And that's when it kind of almost takes place of the playground time that they used to have, where they can just be themselves. And it's a lot of fun to overhear him on that. So we know that gaming is becoming an increasingly important part of that entertainment landscape. It offers the possibility of directly engaging with new characters, stories, storylines, as well as expanding your social network. You may initially start gaming just by yourself, but we often see those gamers tend to expand into larger or groups online that they enjoy. And so one of the big pieces of what we do here at ESA is ensuring that we're providing gamers and the parents and the adults, the caregivers of gamers, with the tools they need to ensure that the gaming is age appropriate, that they have the tools to manage that time. As Stephen mentioned, for many parents, it's younger kids, you want to be limiting screen time. You want to have the tools to be able to do that. We also provide the sort of framework of how you have conversations about your digital time, your online time, because it's an important part of a well-rounded lifestyle, and that includes getting up, getting out. We all know, as Allison mentioned, back-to-back Zooms. I think everybody is realizing that you don't want to be in front of a screen all day long. It's important to get up, get out, and enjoy nature. So how do parents and those gamers directly, how do they take all that into consideration in order to ensure that they are living a well-rounded lifestyle in which gaming is a fun part of their life? There's more than 15 years of studies about the effects of gaming, and it's generally very positive. We see decreased depression, decreased sense of isolation around gaming, increased creativity, increased social connections. And so that's an important piece of what we do and what we try to ensure that we are providing that information out to gamers and like I say, the adults, the caregivers, and the parents of gamers to create that healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear about the intersection of gaming and education and where those things overlap. I was wondering if you could offer parents, especially any tips, anything that they might keep in mind as they're navigating gaming with everything else kids have going on in their lives?
Yes, happy to. So the first one I'd like to mention is parentaltools.org, all one word. That is part of the ESA's efforts to provide parents the information that they need, and it gives them an overview. The biggest piece is understanding, especially for the younger gamers, understanding the content and the games that your kids are playing. Engage your kids in those conversations. Sit and watch. If you want to play the game with them, that's awesome. But if it's something where you just spend a few minutes looking over their shoulder, as I mentioned, my 12-year-old nephew, that was kind of my, just happened to be at the house and just sitting over, kind of watching the game as he was interacting with that. Those conversations are critical for parents to have with their kids. We can provide the tools, game makers provide tools, console makers provide tools to limit time, to limit what kind of communication can be had within the game, to limit in-game purchases or other things. But the real tool that you're going to give your kids for now and for the rest of their lives is how do they think about their interaction with gaming? What's enough for you? What kind of games do you want? Do you know, just like we do with kids every day in the real world, online safety? How do you have those conversations with kids? And those conversations need to continue throughout the life of your kids in your home. And like I say, even adults need to be thinking about those things for themselves. what kind of relationship do you want to have with the gaming? Because again, Stephen referred to, I think it's important to think of not just screen time, but what kind of interactions are you having with the screen? We find that in gaming, there's a lot of education that goes on, whether it's an intentionally educationally directed game or another kind of game in which you're learning more about like cooperation, strategy, planning, thinking ahead, that those sort of things that kids learn just through playing a game without it being intentional. So for parents, those conversations are essential to have. Again, game developers provide them a lot of tools. The console makers provide them tools to limit screen time, like I say, and to ensure that games are age appropriate. Another important tool that we provide through the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, ESRB, is we rate games. And this is something that 88% of adults are aware of the video game rating content. So there's 4 levels of ratings. And within that, we also provide content descriptors so that you can know before you purchase a game, is there communication with others? Is there violence? Anything along the lines of a movie rating, but also, highlighting age-appropriate games for parents. So that is another tool that parents can have. If you go to esrb.org, you can look up any game and find out what the rating is. That's also available on any package that you get. Anytime you purchase a game, before you purchase it, you will be given that information about what the rating is for that game. So another critical tool for parents is to ensure that the gaming content their kids are involved in, or the youngins that they're responsible for, is age appropriate.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, and certainly have given parents a lot of tools that they can add to their toolkit as they navigate this world of gaming at home. And thanks to all the panelists as well for your comments and insights. Next, we'll transition into the Q&A, and we do have a number of questions to dive into. So let's get started. The one question here, the first question is, how can you be an active parent and still respect your children's privacy? Is checking their social media accounts regularly healthy behavior? And is there anyone in particular who would like to answer this one?
I'm happy to start with that. I mean, first of all, most parents are probably not aware of the age 13, of how important that is. That is typically the age in which a child or a teenager can join social media. It's linked to the COPPA, the Child Online Privacy Protection Act. But irregardless, what we said to our daughter and what I recommend parents say to their kids is, yes, you can have a Facebook, Twitter, YouTube account, whatever, at whatever age that you think is appropriate, but not before 13. And I will be your first friend. I will be your first follower. Now, that's not to say that as parents we should overdo things. We shouldn't stalk them. We shouldn't comment on every posting that they do. But just from time to time, check in to see what they're doing. I also think in the early teen years, and certainly preteen, it's very appropriate for parents to have passwords to the various accounts that your kids have. Now, as a teen gets older, and we like to say the training wheels start to come off, then I think that certainly when they're getting to 16, 17, and definitely 18, they have far more, as it were, privacy rights. And I think we should respect those rights. And so, yeah, get involved in your kids' online lives. Play the games that Annie's been describing. They absolutely love to share their online life with you, and particularly if you show an interest.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear that perspective, that kids want to share their lives with the parents. And kind of along these lines, I might as well ask a related question here. And I think this is probably a question a lot of parents have. When should children get phones? At what age? And related to that, at what age do you recommend children get their first social media accounts? How young is too young? And Stephen, I don't know if there's anything you could add to that.
Well, okay, that's pretty much the number one question we can ask. What age should I get my kid a phone? When I first started this, it was what age should I get my high schooler a phone? Then it became middle schoolers, and now we're seeing kindergartners showing up with dad's old iPhone. We don't really think it's appropriate for kindergartners, or even for that matter, elementary school kids, to have these highly sophisticated mini computers in their backpacks. There's quite a number of new digital devices like the Gizmo watch that allows for some very limited texting and phoning and a GPS tracker for the younger set. Roughly we're seeing that somewhere in the middle school years is where most kids are getting their first phone. But again, it doesn't have to be the smartphone. You can get them sort of what my daughter used to describe as dumb phones for the younger set. But whatever device it is that you are going to give to your child, make sure that you have, as Annie was describing, have that conversation with them. And maybe that would be a good moment also to set some ground rules that you agree with your children about their use. Do things like create a closet in the house or the apartment that you're in where everyone, including mom and dad, charges their devices overnight. So there's the temptation to take them to bed isn't there.
Okay.
Now, if I could add, Jens, real quick, from an education perspective, there are a lot of schools, and I think it's really important for parents to work closely with their schools and their teachers and know what the policies are around phones, in the school. But because there are a lot of teachers that have been, when a large percentage or the majority of your kids in your that have phones, they have found creative ways to utilize, that technology within the classroom or within home, to create different types of games of interaction, which is important. But it's really important for parents to know, what are the policies within my campus, where my child attends, or the district, when it comes to phone use in the school, so that, they don't get a phone and then they come home and they say, well, now I've got to pay a fine or, pick up the phone. It's really important to understand what the parameters are, because the last thing you want is for your child to get a phone, get all excited, and all of a sudden it gets picked up because it was not used appropriately within the school setting, within the confines of what those policies are within the school.
Yeah, that's really important. And anyone else want to say anything on that? Otherwise, I have another question, and that shifts the gears from kids to adults and the workplace. And this might be something that either Annie or Allison might be able to speak to. This question is, gaming has become an effective training tool for many organizations in motivating their employees. Has anyone used gaming as a learning tool in their work environment? Allison, anything you might be able to speak to?
I can answer this. So we have used kind of the concept around gamification, if that makes sense, for as a learning tool. It's something I would say particular teams and organizations within Dropbox may use more than other teams. For example, like our sales team will use concepts of gamification inside some of their training. It seems to fit well with sort of some of the goals, I would say, of the organization just overall. But it's something that our learning and organizational development team is kind of always considering, especially, again, I mentioned we're going fully remote, moving forward with some exceptions, but that means all of our training it will also be primarily remote. There will be, again, some exceptions to that. So it can be a challenge, definitely, to make virtual training engaging, and it's something that our teams are always considering. And kind of gamifying that training is something that can lead to, I think, extra engagement. But we just want to be really thoughtful about what we're doing. So again, I would say right now we're kind of just piloting it with specific teams inside of our organization, but it's likely something that we'll continue to kind of potentially become more a part of kind of broader training that we're doing, because it can be a really effective tool, especially in terms of retention too.
Okay. Annie or anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add, it is something that we see increasing interest in. I would agree with Allison, though, for most places that are trying to incorporate it, it's still at a very early level. It's not something that's widespread. The use of video games in training, not only in the workplace, but we see it, like I mentioned earlier, in education. Education is more advanced than the workplace gaming is, and so hopefully that is something we see come in the future. That this technology is always moving, and we know there's a market there on the workforce training side, and it's just a matter of finding out the best use for it. We don't just want to throw it out there just because it's a possibility. Really want to make sure that it's useful.
Yeah. And I think we probably have enough time for one more quick question. And here was an interesting one. And it looks like this is probably for Annie. How can we use games to better teach kids about things like the pandemic? And this person mentions that World of Warcraft as an example, World of Warcraft had a pandemic once several years ago, which I actually think I might have heard about that on a podcast this spring. But is there anything you could talk to on this topic, Annie?
So there are a lot of, I won't say a lot, there are several games that actually use that. If for some of the older folks on, they may remember Oregon Trail, where the pandemic and famine was actually a piece of that game. So if you want to be specific about it like that, there are games that mostly in other worlds, sort of when you're creating your own world, is this a possibility? Not necessarily pandemic as much as famine and that sort of thing, but there are those out there. There's also, if you're looking, what we have seen is we have a game right now with a game within a game that is mapping the human genome. So what I would really encourage people is, if you have this interest, there is probably something out there. Take some time. And this is another place where you can engage your kids, if that is, if that's younger kids or teenage kids, even better, maybe middle school, high school age, is as a family, let's investigate this. Let's go find this game. If this is an area that we're interested in, let's find out if there's a game that we can be playing as a family. It can maybe a team. Is it maybe an interactive thing that we can engage with other folks on? And that's a real opportunity on any area, not just on the pandemic. And there are, like I said, keep an eye out. There are some games that are looking at how they can use the game to teach how you come out of, and what's on the others. What does it look like on the other side? What might some changes be in the way that we conduct day-to-day life, just on the sort of a hygienic level sort of thing. So it's a good opportunity for families, like I said, to engage in those conversations once again and do a little research and have some fun with it, because there's opportunities out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Annie, and thank you, panelists, for answering some of the questions, and thank you to the audience for your great questions. Next, I'd like to wrap things up, and to do that, I'd like to ask each panelist to share a final thought that they'd like to leave the audience with. And if you could please keep this to no more than one to 2 minutes per person. And let's start with Noel.
All right, thank you, Jens Manuel, and thank CHCI for the opportunity to have this important conversation, and how important it is for parents and educators and the community at large and the business community to have these conversations about the resources that are truly needed right now in our communities, especially our Hispanic communities, our communities of color, to be able to connect every single student. One of the cruelest parts of this whole digital divide is that we still have millions of students across our entire K-12 system in higher education who are still not connected as we speak right now. And how important it is for us to contact your members of Congress and contact your state legislatures as they get ready to go into their legislative sessions to provide these desperately needed resources for our public schools. You can go to educatingthroughcrisis.org, which is a site that we created through NEA specifically to help parents navigate and students navigate. What is it that we need to know right now to help support our students, help support our educators, because this is something that is impacting every single one of us and the future of our nation and and being able to close these gaps is going to be critical, that we address them today and in the days to come and in the years to come, to make sure that all of our students truly have that access to a quality public education that they all deserve. So thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, thank you. And next up, Stephen, could you offer some final thoughts?
Well, let me also offer my thanks, Jens, and to CHCI for having me and my organization represented today. Absolutely, I would have to echo what Noel just said. I mean, it's so critical that we get people connected, first and foremost. As more people get connected, though, we also must make sure to educate folks as to the healthy use, a healthy diet, if we will, to learn how to create a balance in their own and their children's online lives. I would urge you to go to fosi.org, FOSI.org, and download in English or in Spanish our 7 steps to good digital parenting. Number 1, I would say, is, and the most important parental control that exists, is to talk with your kids. Talk with them early, talk with them often, stay engaged. Use the parental controls for the younger kids. Talk about online safety tools as they become teens. And our last step is to be a good digital role model yourself. Don't use your phone as an alarm clock, because guess what? That's the last thing you'll look at before you go to sleep. And before you even get out of bed in the morning, you might be there texting and checking your email. Your kids will watch. They'll do what you do rather than what you tell them to do. So make sure that you can show them how to create that balance in their lives. With that, again, thank you so much for having us be a part of this very important discussion.
Thank you. And next up, Allison, could you offer some final thoughts?
Yeah, and just to, again, echo, thank you so much for having me here. And I also, just to kind of build off of what both Noel and Stephen said, I think that balance and sort of wellness overall is going to be something that's increasingly important. I briefly touched on this before, but I think this is our new normal. Even as hopefully the conditions from the pandemic continue to improve, and lots of folks may be going back into the office, but it's likely that more flexibility and remote work it's really kind of here to stay in some capacity. And so just would plug really being thoughtful around how you can create well-being for yourself in terms of what this new kind of work environment looks like as well. I would also suggest, just for some, I think, great tips in terms of how to maintain that work-life balance in a digital, world. And as we move towards more and more remote work, to actually check out our Dropbox blog, which is blog.dropbox.com. And we have what we call our virtual first toolkit on there, with lots of practices around not only how to kind of create the optimal home office space for yourself, but how to think about creating those boundaries and really to promote that work-life balance for yourself in this increasingly remote world. So just would invite all of you to check it out. It's an open resource for any of you. So feel free to take in whatever capacity might make sense for you, even for your families or, the organizations you're a part of. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. And Andy, if you could offer some final thoughts.
I echo everyone else. Thank you to CHCI. This was, I think, a really important forum and important conversation to have. Parting thoughts would be, again, for parents, know what resources are at your fingertips. Look at esrb.org, parentalcontrols.org to find out those resources. And importantly, have these conversations with your kids, have them and your loved ones around your family table, have them not just once, not just twice, but keep going back to this. Make the discussion around digital health and creating a well-rounded, healthy environment that utilizes the available technology, a part of that everyday conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. All of you have certainly given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure a lot for our audience to think about. And thanks again. And one thing that I kept